everybody. I am super excited to be doing an overview of Matthew. This is the first gospel that I'm attempting to break down in a Bible study format to help you have a self-paced Bible study for each book of the Bible. Matthew is I'm speechless about Matthew. I have spent the past 2 or 3 weeks daily diving into Matthew to try to put this together. And I learned so many things that completely blew my mind. And one thing that really helped was doing the series on the prophets. It's not mandatory. The Gospels stand on their own. But if you have time to go through Haggai, Malachi, Isaiah, these are very heavily quoted books in Matthew. And that'll actually bring me to my first point about the book of Matthew, which is that Matthew is very focused on a Jewish audience and showing that this idea of prophecy being fulfilled is happening in Jesus. He gives line after line in his gospel and points out very, very often this was to fulfill the prophecy. And sometimes he does it explicitly. Other times it's by the name he uses for Jesus, Son of David, referring to Jesus as Son of David. But just it's lots of focus on the Old Testament and showing the patterns of fulfillment of prophecy in Matthew. Matthew starts off with a lot of people think of the normal Christmas story, the birth story of Jesus, and that's the flavor that they think of as the entrance to the gospel. One thing that kind of stood out was how much the gospels have become combined in my head as I think about the gospels. I tend to mash some of the gospels together. And by digging into Matthew in and of itself, I got this really individual flavor, like it does develop a voice of its own. And so in that vein, Matthew is a tax collector. He's a Jew, right? He's writing, and it seems to be that he's writing to other Jews. It's got a very Jewish feel. It's pointing out a lot of scripture that the Jewish people would have been familiar with. And it's broken up into 5 discourses. And the discourses have different themes. But the first one is, actually the intro to the ESV Study Bible has some good examples of Matthew's discourses, and it breaks it up into questions. It says that if you think about the questions that each discourse is answering, it's a little bit easier to remember them. But the first discourse is in chapters 5 through 7. And in that, Jesus is talking about how kingdom citizens are supposed to live, how people invited to live in his kingdom, what that looks like. And I've heard Matthew described as kind of a beginner guide to Christianity because of the Sermon on the Mount, which is the Beatitudes, and then his preaching on the different characteristics, whether it's anger or lust, or it's almost like a Christianity 101 section. The second discourse, so there's some narrative in there from 8 to 9. Then in the second discourse is chapter 10, and it talks about how our traveling disciples supposed to conduct themselves, the actions of these first disciples that are sent out. In the third discourse, it's focused on the parables that Jesus used. So the messaging in the parables, the different meanings, what glimpses into the kingdom that Jesus' main message was about. So Jesus' main message in all the Gospels is about bringing about a kingdom. And it's not a worldly kingdom. It's God's kingdom. It's the kingdom of heaven. And he talks over and over again in parables. And so one of the things that really was interesting to me that I learned was that when we look at the parables, oftentimes it's not the moral of the story. Like, it's not about a moral. it's about the character of the kingdom. In fact, Jesus, when he's explaining the parables to the disciples, explicitly says, these parables are to teach you about the kingdom and the nature of the kingdom. So that's the third discourse in chapter 13. The fourth discourse is in chapters 18 through 20, and it's about Jesus's warnings. It's a series of warnings about hindering people's entrance into the kingdom and on forgiveness. So there's a lot about the consequences of the religious elite, who he spends a lot of time being pretty abrasive to in their interactions, and it's a loving abrasiveness. That's what we have to kind of take away from that. There's a lot of that going on where he's speaking truth to people. Some people spin this a little bit and put a social justice spin on it and say that Jesus is being incredibly rebellious and I don't necessarily see that, but I've heard that in today, like a lot of people are saying, well, this is Jesus standing up to the man. It's him instituting social justice. And to me, I think there's a lot of people reading our current trend, fads, popular worldviews onto the Bible rather than letting the Bible shape their view of it. Because Jesus is talking about bringing about his kingdom. And there's a lot about the social justice movement and other things that are just contrary to the gospel message in general. And then his fifth discourse is How Will Human History End? Chapters 24 through 25. I believe that's called the Olivet Discourse. And again, there's lots of focus on the Old Testament and showing patterns of prophecy fulfillment, and also a lot of references to the Old Testament, and especially in the Olivet Discourse and other areas, the discourse areas, like the question about marriage and divorce. The Pharisees and Sadducees try to trip him up with Old Testament law questions. Jesus shows us how to interpret Old Testament law and what the intent of it is. And that's just, it's mind-blowing, really, to get that perspective here. Matthew, so with those discourses, you'll notice there were gaps in between them. So it's kind of like narrative to discourse. It's the storytelling to explanation or debate, right? And so Matthew's going through and showing Jesus his actions and what he's doing, and then the discourse and the debates that he's having in those other sections. So one thing that really stands out about the passion narrative, the crucifixion aspect of Matthew's gospel, is how utterly alone, how utterly abandoned Jesus is leading up to the cross, on the cross, and after. And there's Jesus coming back and being resurrected. But out of the four Gospels, I heard it, a very good quote. I'm going to see if I can find that. Sorry, pause the recording to see if I can find it. I was not able to find it. It's Matthew, in comparison to the other Gospels, very clearly insists that Jesus' death is in and of itself a victory. And that is, it's actually a very touching part of Matthew's book, as it is in all the Gospels, this culminating event. But I think Matthew has a little bit different take and a little bit different flavor on it. There's not so Peter denies Jesus 3 times, but in Matthew there's no redemption of that. There's the Great Commission, and Peter's brought obviously into that, but the other Gospels go out of their way to show almost more of a reconciliation between the disciples and Jesus. I think that one of the things that also stands out in Matthew's book is the parallel between the 12 disciples and the 12 tribes of Israel. This parallel and symbolism is very stark here, I think, because Matthew is even more focused on the Jewish side of things. But lots of little things like that. All in all, I just learned a lot. I'm looking very much forward to jumping into this. Like and subscribe to catch all these videos as they come out. I'm going to be releasing them on a set schedule. I've been doing some other videos in between, but please, I will have at least a few of these from each Bible chapter coming out each week is the way that I'm structuring it now, and hope to continue to structure it. But like and subscribe to, stay in the know about those. Put in the comments what you loved most if you've already read through Matthew, or what you're looking forward to digging into as we go through the book. But again, this is set up to be a self-paced Bible study for you to go at your own pace, chapter, section by section. I'm actually not going to do chapter by chapter in this one. I'm going to try a little bit of a different format, but we're going to jump into it and see how it goes. So thank you for hanging out. I love doing this with you and being here talking about this stuff. So I will catch you in the next videos. All right, I'll let you go. Peace.